She walked into the restaurant dressed in simple clothes, her true identity hidden. To the other diners, she was just another customer ordering a steak on an ordinary night. But she wasn't ordinary. She was a millionaire in disguise, testing the world without her wealth to protect her. What she didn't know was that this night would be different. A black waiter, weary from long hours yet carrying himself with quiet strength, would place more than just a meal before her. He would deliver a message, one so powerful it would leave her shaken, questioning everything she thought she knew. The woman had always lived in a world of privilege. Wealth, status, and influence were things she rarely had to think twice about. But over time, she grew curious about the way people treated her when they didn't know who she was. Stripped of expensive jewelry and tailored clothes, she often slipped into places where no one would suspect her real identity. That night, she chose a small steakhouse tucked into a quiet corner of the city. Its wooden tables were worn from years of service, the air filled with the scent of sizzling meat and soft chatter from families and workers grabbing a late meal. She noticed him the moment she walked in. The black waiter moved swiftly between tables, his steps tired but steady, his smile polite though his eyes revealed exhaustion. He carried trays with precision, balancing more than just food. He carried the weight of being overlooked, underestimated, and often dismissed. She had seen others like him before, but something about the way he held his dignity, even when customers spoke to him coldly, caught her attention. When he reached her table, there was no hint of judgment in his tone, no assumption about who she might be, just professional courtesy. She ordered a simple steak, medium rare, and a glass of water. He nodded, scribbled it down, and left. To her, it was just a meal. To him, it was another moment in a long night of service. Neither of them knew that what he would bring her alongside that plate would change both of their lives forever. The restaurant buzzed with the clatter of dishes, laughter from a nearby family, and the occasional sharp voice of an impatient customer. The woman sat quietly, blending in with the modest crowd, her disguise working perfectly. No one glanced twice at her. No one suspected that she was someone who could buy the entire building with a single transaction. And that was exactly what she wanted, to see how people treated her when they believed she was just another face in the room. Her eyes, however, kept drifting back to the waiter. She noticed how certain tables barely acknowledged him, speaking as though his presence was a burden. Others waved him off with dismissive gestures, sometimes even snapping their fingers to call him over. Yet, no matter how they treated him, his response never faltered. His movements were disciplined, his voice steady, his smile practiced. But beneath that exterior, she could sense something heavier, a weight that had been carried for far too long. He paused for a moment at a table, near hers, where a couple whispered loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Why is he so slow?" one muttered, rolling their eyes. The other chuckled softly as if his exhaustion was a joke. The woman felt a pang in her chest, though she remained still, hiding her emotions. The waiter didn't respond. He simply adjusted the tray in his hands and continued with his work, refusing to let their words pierce the dignity he fought to hold on to. When he finally returned with her steak, she studied his face more closely. There was a quiet strength there, the kind forged through hardship. He placed the plate before her gently, along with a folded napkin that seemed slightly heavier than normal. For a moment, his eyes met hers, and though neither of them spoke, something unspoken passed between them. She didn't open the napkin right away. Instead, she picked up her fork, pretending to focus on the food, but her mind was restless. Why did he leave it like that? Was it a mistake? A forgotten order slip tucked inside? Or was it something meant for her? Curiosity gnawed at her as she replayed every interaction she had observed that night. This wasn't just a waiter serving steak. There was something he carried, something he wanted to say, but perhaps couldn't voice out loud. The woman hesitated, her fingers brushing over the folded cloth. The edges were crisp, but inside she felt the unmistakable texture of paper. Her heart quickened. It wasn't part of the restaurant's routine, she knew that much. Slowly, almost cautiously, she slipped the note from beneath the fabric and, held it in her hands. What kind of message would a weary, overworked black waiter leave for a stranger he had only just met? A simple thank you? A plea for understanding? Or something deeper, something that would pierce through the disguise she wore and strike directly at the core of who she truly was? Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper tucked within the napkin. The handwriting was neat but rushed, as though written in the stolen moments between serving tables. At first she expected it to be something lighthearted, maybe even a simple thank you for supporting the restaurant. But as her eyes scanned the words, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a note. It was a confession, a cry, a message from a man who lived every day unseen. The waiter's words spoke of exhaustion beyond physical labor, of the weight of always having to prove himself in a world that too often judged him by the color of his skin before ever listening to his voice. He wrote of the countless times customers looked past him, dismissing his service as though his presence was unworthy of acknowledgement. He wrote of the pain of being polite when others were cruel, of standing tall even when dignity was chipped away piece by piece. But amid the hardship, his words carried something unexpected: hope. He spoke of the importance of kindness, of treating people as human beings regardless of their uniform or status. He wrote about his dream of a future where his children wouldn't have to smile through disrespect just to survive. And at the end, one sentence stood alone, underlined as if he wanted to etch it into the heart of whoever read it. You may never remember my face, but I hope you remember my humanity. The woman froze. The bustling sounds of the restaurant faded into silence around her. She looked at the waiter across the room, still moving between tables with the same quiet grace, unaware of the storm his words had unleashed inside her. Her disguise suddenly felt meaningless. She had walked in pretending to be invisible, testing others. But here, in this small steakhouse, a man society tried to render invisible had reminded her of something far more profound. His message stripped away the walls she had built around herself and left her exposed, not as a millionaire, not as a woman in disguise, but as a human being confronted with a truth she could no longer ignore. The woman sat motionless, the note still in her hands, her heart thundering in her chest. She had dined in the most lavish restaurants in the world, where waiters bowed low and chefs prepared meals worth thousands of dollars. Yet never before had a meal carried such weight. It wasn't the steak on the plate that left her shaken. It was the truth etched on the paper by a man the world barely noticed. She glanced at him again. He wasn't watching her. He was too busy balancing plates, refilling glasses, and forcing polite smiles even when customers treated him as though he were invisible. That struck her hardest of all. How many times had she, in her own wealth and comfort, walked past people like him? How many faces had she ignored, convinced they were just part of the background of her life? Quietly, she folded the note and slipped it into her bag, determined never to forget it. The steak grew cold on her plate, but she didn't care. For the first time in a long time, she felt small, not in a way that diminished her, but in a way that made her realize how much bigger the world was than the bubble of wealth she lived. And when she finally rose to leave, she didn't reveal who she was. There was no dramatic announcement, no flashing of money or promises spoken aloud. She simply left a generous tip, one that would cover more than just the meal, and slipped away into the night, her heart heavier than when she had entered. But that wasn't the end. Days later, she sat at her desk in her luxurious home, the note spread out before her once again. Its words echoed in her mind. You may never remember my face, but I hope you remember my humanity. And she knew she couldn't let it end as just an emotional evening. She had the power to act. Within weeks, she began funding scholarships for underprivileged youth, creating opportunities for those who were so often overlooked. She partnered with organizations fighting against racial discrimination, determined to amplify voices that had been silenced for too long. She never told the waiter where her inspiration had come from. He never knew that the simple act of slipping a message beneath a napkin had rippled out into something greater. And yet, the truth was undeniable. His humanity had changed hers. The story closes. One haunting question lingers for every viewer. How many times have we ignored the quiet voices of those who serve us, missing the chance to see the humanity that could change our own? Because sometimes the most powerful messages don't come from the wealthy or the powerful. Sometimes they come from the hands that carry our plates and the hearts that the world tries hardest to forget.